Breathing in through your tummy and breathing out. And as you breathe deeper, you notice the surroundings and you feel a sense of warmth, calmness and peace. And access a state of learning, that state of learning you're in when your peripheral vision expands and you have an open mind. And as you access that state, go into that state you're in of curiosity, of learning, and a bit like when you first learned to walk, and as you took your first steps you fell and you got back up again, and you sort of carried on going, and first learned to ride a bike or tie your shoelaces or drive, and you might have stalled a couple of times, and then it became an unconscious competence. And now as we enter the next phase of the course, you can gradually bring back that state in your own time, in your own pace, to the here and now, and going to a state of curiosity and learning for the next component of the course. So in your own time, in your own pace, just come back to the here and now when you're ready to come back. And breathe naturally and normally. Gradually opening your eyes, coming back, and okay. Now in that state, I want you to relate to what we have covered thus far, and we think about some of the exercises we did earlier, the exercises around energy, and also the exercises around the hypothesis. The hypothesis being is that if you had amnesia of anything that happened up to a certain point in your life, so you don't recall anything before 21 years of age, and just reflect on that for a moment, how would we know? How would our personality be different? How do we communicate to people? How would we reflect to people? And going back now, thinking, okay, without substantiating evidence, it's difficult to truly know oneself. What makes us who we are? Our cognition, our cognitive thoughts, our experiences in life. All these things are multifactorial. They lead to a point where, okay, certain pivotal moments in our life that took us to where we are and what we do, emotional events. And one hypothesis is the soul does indeed remain alive throughout our lives, that it must exist during space and time in between lives. So you've got chronological time, Industrial Revolution time. So at a point of when the Industrial Revolution came along, time became important, imperative, because you've got to be at a certain place at 9, and catch the train at this time, and eat at this time. And in the world we live in, it makes a lot of sense to have time in the way that we know it. But think before that point. What did we do before that point? What did we do all those years ago? We didn't have the chronological. And when we age the sun comes up, and our circadian rhythms.
Yeah, use your natural clock.
Yeah, the rhythm being is that we know that cortisol drops significantly late in the evening when it's darker. And maybe the reason being is time for rest. We don't need to run or get away from any animals chasing us there. But in the morning, we know it's time to hunt, and cortisol is at highest. So we have that sort of rhythm, and okay, you think back to all those years ago, the way we sort of structured our lives, in the way that our life was structured. We sort of hunt food and go from place to place and environment to environment, look for new areas and look for new places to expand and going forward. And if you think between space and time, it's a difficult concept to get our head around, because we've been conditioned since very, very young to work around this chronological clock. But time can be distorted, because you could be at and you can hear the clock in the background now, perfect cue. And the reason being is that you're at a bus stop one day and you're waiting for the bus and you're in pleasant company. It's a beautiful sunny day and in pleasant company, and that hour feels like 5 minutes. you're actually thinking, well, actually, busts I could do if you're going away. But equally, on the other side of the scale, you are at the bus stop and you're in unpleasant company and it's windy and rainy and not a great day, and 5 minutes feels like an hour. The concept is different. And you know that you also emotionally code events. So at a point in your life where perhaps someone might have felt rejected by their parents young, and they've coded emotionally that experience, and then later on in life, if they ask someone to go for a coffee, the person says no, they feel a sense of rejection. They feel scolded. They feel the emotional wound, the emotional sensitivity. Because you know on any given day, if you sort of tap someone on the back, all things being well, they're okay. But if they've got sunburn, you tap them on the back and it's sore. But equally, you know that for the most part, for most people, certain things are okay. But certain things hit that sort of raw nerve. The soul does not stop and start again. We can use the hypothesis based on it moves from place to place. So it's not a stop-start mechanism. And I think what's really fascinating for me too is if you ever get a chance to look at the deep Hubble telescope experiment where they shine that powerful telescope into the darkness, into the abyss, and they see all these galaxies that we're not even aware of, which is, for me, it's humbling. Because as human beings, I think we like to think we know so much, and I have one foot in the science camp and one foot in the spiritual camp, and I think, okay, science knows so much. We're at this edge of a pier, but there's an ocean we don't know. And the Hubble telescope experiment for me, where they shine the torch into the telescope into the dark abyss and see all these galaxies that we're unaware of, just humbles us to think, okay, we're just this sort of small, pale blue dot in a huge horizon. So the soul evolves through many incarnations, as is suggested. So the spirit is quintessentially you in this hypothesis. So in one way of putting it is DNA. So you have a mother or a father biologically, and then DNA collates to make you a new version. So there's your soul and spirit is one hypothesis too, but the DNA being that you're unique. See, there's about 7 billion people in the world. Not that I'm counting, but so I'm told. But there's no one who's got the exact DNA that you have. The genetic variation that you've got. There's only one you. There only has ever been one you. There'll only ever be, based on what we know at this point, one you. You're it. And it's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it, how these things work. And you think, okay, the soul and spirit. Because we know now through science that show me the grandparents and I can tell you a lot about the person. So if you introduce me to your grandparents, or at the point of if they've passed, if I had a capsule to go back and speak to them, I knew a lot about them, then there'd be indicators of your personality through them. That's a given. We know that now. That genetic variations are passed on. That's a fact. So, you know, you might have a brother or sister, identical twin. They're different to you. They have their own unique character. So they might look similar to you if they're a twin, but they are their own unique. And you see twin studies, by the way. And twin studies are fascinating for me because, okay, you look at the genetic variation, and obviously the closer the twin, but then you see how the environment shapes their reality. Or one develops one condition and one doesn't. And I think twin studies are really fascinating because they're giving us a much broader input into the genome.
I had a personal experience with twins when I was younger. I have two friends, similar age, about a year older than me, and I grew up with them, and they have both slightly different traits. Now, one ended up being my best friend, the one I sort of associated with, Andrew, he ended up being an alcoholic and dying of cirrhosis of the liver, whereas his slightly younger brother, which is called 5 minutes younger than him, he was fine, and it was quite fascinating growing up seeing him. Yes. You know. No,
absolutely, and I think through twin studies, it's often said in the science world that for example, say, talent skip generations, where scientists suggest that recessive genes are passed down through generations, in the sense that, okay, the grandparents experienced certain trauma, the grandparents experienced certain conditions in life, and that has an impact on one's behaviour. And the point being is that perhaps that's the same where energy is concerned. And I don't know if you're aware, if you ever read the research paper, for example, on the Dutch famine in World War II. And it's a really fascinating piece of literature, because in the latter days of the war, the Germans had made a case of stopping food in certain places in the Netherlands. Okay, now very briefly, the paper sort of shows how the grandchildren of the grandparents who had experienced this famine had nutritional deficiencies and conditions that potentially were brought by the expression of gene in the grandparents who experienced the famine. So whilst you had their children and their children, so they inherited certain traits through the grandparents who were starved of nutrition. So you've got all these environmental factors that express our genes, a bit like the study I've mentioned before, and the research paper, the rat licking experiment that they did. You're probably aware of that one, where they took pups, which are rat babies, and they segregated these pups with nurturing mothers who would lick the rats, and non-nurturing mothers that wouldn't lick the rats as much as the nurturing mothers would. Now, licking the rat is an expression of love in the rat community, so I'm told. Exactly. But in the first week of their birth, but even 20 years later, and this was sort of stumbled upon by scientists, the rats who were licked in the first week were less aggressive and less anxious than the ones that were licked. So it sort of showed how we've got these genes, and so the nature-nurture debate is long dead, it's salient. Now we know it's both. You've got these genes, and they're expressed through various situations and circumstances. Now the point I'm getting at here, and the point I'm making here, is perhaps that's the same through what we inherit energetically. So maybe we have got certain choices and perhaps certain situations that we're presented with in our life have an impact on us as people and what we do and how we go about doing things and the situation we find ourselves in. Because there are certain situations and do you ever find yourself doing things that you've done before for whatever reason, same cycle? You think, I cannot believe I've got myself caught up in this same cycle of, we've all been there before, attracting the same people, same circumstances.
That's because we go off the same program again and again. Every day we wake up thinking the same thing as we did the day before. And you have to break that cycle to change your life. Precisely.
Yeah. And one way of breaking the cycle is, if we talked about earlier about the 21, after 21, you don't remember anything before 21. And if you don't remember anything before 21, you can't break any cycles. Because if you regress yourself to a point where, I don't know nothing prior to me being 21. If you're in a situation like that, you have an amnesia, well, you don't know where you're born, you don't know how old you are, you don't know why you chose a profession. You just wake up one morning and all you can remember is to that point. So perhaps using regression as a technique can take you beyond this lifetime to explore and break the damn cycle.
Well, that's what I've done with meditation, is not like forgotten about the past, but don't let it affect my future.
Precisely.
Rather trying to forget about
There's a possibility,
accept it, move on from it, learn from it,
and
then but change maybe your thoughts or your thought patterns.
Well, we know we can change cognition now, exactly, and we know that energy, you go in a room and there's been an argument, you can feel it, and you can be around some people and feel uplifted, and other people you can feel down. But have you got deja vu before? Like you've been somewhere before?
Yeah,
we all get that. Or maybe you've dreamt a dream and you've been somewhere else, you could never have known where it was. Now, there is the other idea behind all that you might have read about or seen on TV, and you can't rule that out. That's for sure. But we also know that there's negative characteristics that come back over again. And equally, have you ever seen children sometimes display certain characteristics very young they couldn't have learned from a very early age? And it sort of relates back to a grandparent or parent, or you kind of think, well, they've got that similar trait.
Well, when I was younger, I used to knit with my mum. Where did I learn to knit?
Well, I mean,
Six years old, I couldn't knit.
Where did Mozart learn to do what he did?
Yeah.
The symphony he created, at 4 years of age, Mozart could do what he did, and the things that people do and say. We know that the big 5-factor model, the personality trait model, they say that's biological, it's genetic. Our traits are to a point. Now, you could argue, well, can you change it? Well, who knows? What you can do is influence them and understand what you've got and be more aware of it. So if you know one of your traits is conscientiousness, if you know one of your traits is neuroticism, then you might find a way to channel that in the best possible way rather than let the trait run you, so to speak. We'll never know the truth, at least at the point we are now. We might in the future, I don't know. Because often the question I get asked is, okay, is it true? Do we really have past lives?
Does it really matter though? It's more about belief, isn't it? Than
Precisely.
Right or wrong, or
Precisely.
true or false.
Precisely. For me, the interesting point is no matter how long you debate that seeks for the answers, we'll never know the truth. So I've had people come to me at seminars saying to me, I was doing a seminar in time to hundreds of people. I was in Eastbourne, and this woman would come to me saying, I want you to say past lives are true. I said, I am an honest person, and I'm going to give you an honest answer. I don't know. I've not met anyone that's come back. So I don't know. I don't do it for that. I do it to help people overcome the issues we talked about earlier when it's appropriate and the right circumstances, but I'm not going to rule it out. So the point being is that I respect people's beliefs. It's their call. One way of looking at things is most soul paths are very simple. So for me, people are looking for this sort of big realization. This huge realization to change the world. I'm going to go back and be... For me, it's about learning even the basics. Love and compassion. Maybe learn to love oneself. Not to change the world in one big swoop. You make a difference. Okay? You going away from here today, having a bit more love and compassion towards other people, and people having love and compassion towards you will make a huge difference. Think of where we are now. 100 years ago, we didn't have what we've got now. We're sitting in a really nice room in a beautiful area. It's peaceful. We're safe. We've got shelter. We've got warmth. We can do the things we do now. 100 years ago, we wouldn't have this. We wouldn't have anything like this. And 100 years before that, we wouldn't have that. So I'd like to think, as much as a lot of bad things happen in the world, I think we are evolving in the sense that, okay, more and more people have water every day, more and more people are taking out poverty every day. There are a lot of bad things, don't get me wrong, and I'm not denying that. But if you think of where we are compared to where we were, we are improving incrementally. And some might say the improvements can't happen fast enough, but I think as a human race, we're quite new. If we look at evolution, if we consider evolution being one hypothesis, and you think, well, actually, no, probably 100,000 years. So we're not really, in a way, we're just out of the swamp. So I sort of use the philosophy between our, DNA. You think, well, this is a scientific fact. The sequencing is different, but you think from a DNA point of view, we're 98% DNA chimpanzee and over 80% dog. So I think in that respect, we've got a little part of the brain that separates us from, but we've still got a long way to go. The sequences are different. I think for me, the argument is if we're 2% different to a chimpanzee, and look what we can do. We can do 10,000 words, we can build these structures, we can build aeroplanes, all these things. Imagine a being 2% beyond us, what they can do. And I really believe we can sort of work on love and compassion a bit. We'll see a much more progressive society. But that's another story for another day. But one thing that's worth reading, if you get a chance to, is the Canadian psychiatrist, Ian Stevenson. He spent 40 years travelling around the country in Canada, studying children who had exhibited phobias. So, you know the children that got invisible friends? Ever seen the kids with invisible friends and traumas and
Well,
something?
I used to have invisible friends.
I've got a couple now, actually. Yeah.
Come on.
But you know, and some had these birthmarks in places that they remembered the wounds from previous life. So these kids were saying, "Well, I've got this birthmark here."
I've got a big massive one here.
And that's what they were saying. And he investigated it, and he was never able to offer explanation how that happened. He could never explain that. So some of the kids would say that this happened in World War One, for example. I got shot by whatever. And he was never able to explain how that. And I think sometimes what's quite fascinating is that, for me, sort of going away from here, you ever had a dream and you wake up the next day and you've got a damn cut or something, and you don't know where it's come from? Anyone have that? You never had that? Never had that before? Never? You never woke up in the morning and had a bruise out of nowhere?
I've had the opposite though.
Yeah.
I hurt myself for the day, actually. And I went to bed with the intention of it not blistering or anything like that. I bet myself put a lot on the fire and was here, and the next day there was no blister, no burn, nothing.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I think in that respect, it's one of them where, you have an open mind. This is a really good book.
Also, I made a mole disappear on the top of my head as well. Last year, when I was in Australia, I had this melanoma just starting to grow on my head. And I made it go over within 4 days. I've got pictures of it on my phone as well. I made it just disappear.
Fascinating. I mean, I do recommend, if you've got that, go to your GP. But if you've got these powers, man, it's fine stuff.
Got proof.
Yeah. No. I have an open mind.
I FaceTime my daughter and she goes, "Oh, I seen you had the thing moved on your head. It was really getting really big." And I said to her, "No," I said, "I did it myself." She was like, "What?" Yeah.
I mean, I have an open mind, but I also, if you've got anything like that, see your GP. But I've got an open mind. But another good book to read too is anyone ever read the Jenny Cockle book in her book Yesterday's Children? Really fascinating read. It really is. It's fascinating because she talks about meeting her children from a previous life. It's quite fascinating because she, if memory serves me correct, it was Ireland. This name kept popping up in her head. And she investigated it, and she found that what she knew, and the actual children, vouched for her, I believe, and they were adamant that she was the mum in obviously a different form. And it was and what was really fascinating about that book, really, she visited all these different lands and several other lives, and all the research was always correct. Now, look, I don't know if it's true or not true. I'm only going off what I read. And you make your own mind up, but I think that it is quite fascinating that people can recall things that you could never imagine. It's a really, really good read. If you get a chance to read it, it's a fascinating read, and I thought it was really, really fascinating to think that someone can recall these things that, how would she have known? How would they have known? So you kind of start to think, well,
there was an article in an Indian girl, she was murdered in one village. And she was reborn and everything, and she told her parents, her new parents, exactly what village she was from.
I read that, yeah.
And who murdered her, how, where she was buried, and all that and the other, and they went and dug her up. And
incredible, isn't it? Yeah, and these sort of things you kind of think, and Carl Jung, to quote Carl Jung, the great Carl Jung, the humanistic psychologist, my life often seemed to me like a story that has no beginning and no end. I had the feeling that I was an historical fragment, an expert for which the preceding and succeeding text was missing. I could well imagine that I might have lived in former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, that I had been born again because I had not fulfilled the task given to me. Carl Jung, pretty amazing stuff. And you know what, by the way, I was in a group discussion one time, a university group discussion with other students, other learners, and this guy, if memory serves me correct, I stand corrected, I'm only going off what this guy put on a post, he was saying that later on in his life, Carl Jung have said they've had psychosis. So, you've got to wonder sometimes, because in certain countries around the world, psychosis is not seen the way we see it. In certain places around the world, I'm not suggesting it's, this is the case, by the way, but there are certain cases that are celebrated. as an enlightenment. Now, I know it's debilitating, I'm not making light of it, I'm just putting it out there for us to think about, which is pretty fascinating. You think Carl Jung, you know, the humanistic, and you think, well, why is he going with something there? It's fascinating. So for me, it's not about, there's many different ideas and theories that we can neither prove or disprove. Okay, I can't disprove or prove many things, and neither can any of us. But I think the key thing is, for me, is you know, the ideas are fluid and nebulous. They are changeable, and they seem to be adaptable to people who profound them. What counts for me is the person's perception of events. That's the main thing. But what I want to put out there first of all, before we close our mind on life regression, in the 1500s, sailors were afraid of travelling across the other side of the world. Do you know why?
Yeah,
they thought they'd fall off.
Before the earth was flat, basically.
Some people still believe the earth is flat now, by the way. Yeah. The first motor car, 1800s. The 20th century, man on the moon, person on the moon. Okay, and they brought back samples to prove it wasn't.
But do you know when the motor cars first come out, they thought that you'd die of suffocation if you went over 90 miles an hour.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well, so.
And Roger Bannister, the Miracle Mile, under 4 minutes, you know, you couldn't do it.
I never thought anyone could do that. And
the phenomenon of the internet, exactly. And if you could say to someone now, if you went back, say, 30, 40 years ago, I can have a device, and the device can send a text.
Yeah. But just that, my dad was fascinated when FaceTime and Skype come out originally.
Yes.
My dad was like, I can't believe that I'm sitting in my room talking to you and I can see you and see what's going on.
Absolutely. And the thing is, precisely, you know, TVs and computers, all these things at one point, you know, and think of the frequencies that we use to do all that. So one has to have an open mind, but in the Western world, it's a new idea, in the sense that other parts of the world have thought that could be the case for thousands of years. Carl Jung, in the 20th century, probably was the most prolific person who sort of, in his quotes and in his talks, would sort of enter the minds of people. Now plays a full and pivotal role in New Age philosophies. It's a possibility. There's a number of regressive techniques out there, which we'll sort of explore shortly, as well as past life. What do you use them for? Well, what I use them for, non-exhaustive, emotional eating, smoking, fears, phobia, breaking up, moving on, negative beliefs, trauma. I did an interview recently with a woman who does a lot of regressive techniques, and she does it for somatic conditions as well. So these aren't exhaustive areas, by the way, but these are areas that I potentially, in the right circumstances, right situation, will use them. I mentioned earlier about emotional laden memories. So sometimes you have a memory that's loaded with emotion. The rejection of the parents, for example, it's a laden memory. It's like putting a bottle on fizzy pop, ready to explode, and then implicitly we react in certain ways without realising the way we're reacting. It's like, okay, we see a colour, a sound, see a face, and bang, it's the fuel that burns the fire, so to speak. And even to the point that you can't trace it back. So, for example, let's say, in the situation where, you regress someone maybe back to the womb, and they feel that in the womb they weren't wanted. They pick up the vibration, or even after they were born, and maybe they were put to cry to sleep. Now, we know back in the day, there was an emphasis. There was like an unwritten rule. The baby can cry themselves to sleep. But the baby doesn't cry themselves to sleep. The baby is traumatized. Because the baby's crying because it wants food, water, it wants love, it wants to be held. And the idea of a baby, in the first year, by the way, and that first year is imperative, scientifically, it's when most of the neurons are developed. You're put in a cot to cry to sleep. It's potentially going to have an impact. You look at the rapid experiments, obviously that first week, equivalent to the first year for us. So imperatively. So maybe it's a manifestation of...
They say it comes down to the ability for the person to self-soothe. If they have like a self-soothing...
Yeah, because my mum said I never used to cry, and they used to come and actually pick me up
Yeah.
to make sure that I was still alright.
Yeah.
So I was getting that stimulation
Yeah.
when I didn't cry.
Okay.
So maybe I learned not to cry.
Yeah.
To get that attention.
When you say to self-soothe, what?
Like as an adult, if you have an ability to self-soothe, to be able to calm yourself down, to know that you're safe, that it's okay, rather than not where you'll probably seek out or not be able to cope with those emotions.
Okay. So as an adult, yes. Okay.
Yeah, as an adult.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing really we can learn. We can learn didactically, but then we know that the part of the brain, evolution of the brain, the parts of the brain that this is sort of stored in, our limbic region, the amygdala, hippocampi, the aversion that senses danger, saying it is one thing, but the implicit reaction happens outside our awareness is something different altogether too. So it can be useful sometimes to go back and re-script the memories, which we're going to go into more detail as we go along. But the fact is that, you know, these are sort of pivotal moments. Now, the other point being is that, okay, when I mentioned trauma, for example, now trauma doesn't have to be fighting in a war, albeit that can be obviously very traumatic. Trauma can be abandonment. So, okay, you ask the client, who did you feel safe around growing up as a child? The client says, I didn't feel safe around anybody. Well, you know, obviously that's trauma. It's pathological. Because the first place you want to start, if you're working with someone, at least one of the most important parts is feeling safe.
Yeah.
Irrespective of what you do with anyone, work with anyone at any point, if they don't feel safe, you know, and the key point being is that for me, from a point of view, the person regresses and has that sort of realization, and this is sort of powerful stuff which one shouldn't use lightly. But the point being, you're drifting along this journey in life and you never felt safe around anybody growing up, and then you wonder why you push everyone away. You wonder why you let no one in past that barrier. You wonder why the person's afraid. They block you out. And you make it personal. You think, why is the person blocking me out? Why won't this person let me in? Well, they're afraid because they never felt safe before. And every time they feel a certain feeling, they feel vulnerability. Okay. So they feel a sense of vulnerability to the point that they switch off completely and block it out. So you block that memory out to feel a sense of safety. Now, what I want to talk about is about, I mentioned earlier about the one sticking to a remit. So I said what I use this for, but I also said earlier that, for example, I had a call recently, someone saying to me, would you do regression with me? I had some trauma issues, and I said, well, actually, you know what, before I do any work with you, I suggest that you go see your GP, if you've done so already anyway, or get some clinical help. And she said she did have clinical help. I said, well, get the clinician to maybe email me. I'll tell them what I propose to do if they feel it's the right thing to do, if that's what you want to do. And the reason being is that we know mood disorders like depression, anxiety, and other things could be the manifestation of something else. Now, I'm not a medical person. I have enough knowledge through the experience of what I've learned to help people from a mind point of view to know that things like mood disorders and affective disorders can be the manifestation of something else. So hence the safeguarding issue of whether it's appropriate to work with that person. So for example, you know, I've talked about this before, that perhaps someone who's got psychosis might be psychologically too fragile to do such a process. Perhaps someone who's got some sort of psychological or mental health problem may not be able to do such a process, or if they deemed appropriate to do it, it might need to come from their clinical supervisor, because these are deep, intricate processes. But also in saying that, if we look at the biological side of these things, the biological side of affective disorders as well, someone could have anxiety, for example, they could have Cushing syndrome, thyroid dysfunction, vitamin deficiency, substance misuse, medical-induced neurological conditions. And these are for the medical people to deal with. But we know these disorders can cause mood affective disorders, and that might need to be corrected. I don't have the remit to do any of this. But equally, if someone comes to see me, I would get them to do a battery of testing to rule what other possibilities it could be. Because you know what, you could be like the chiropractor treating someone for pain, and I did a course for chiropractors one time on hypnosis and pain relief. I said, well, the first thing you want to do, what I would do is, you got pain, go see a medical person first. And they said, why would you do that? Because I said, well, if you've got back pain, and you're treating for 6 months for back pain, what if it's a damn tumour? What do you damn do then? So the point being is that, okay, we want to sort of be clear about what our role is, what we can do, but we also, we know that Parkinson's, the meningic system, can cause mood disorder, tumours, a stroke, all these things. And unless you're a medical person or specialise in the area, we don't know. So for me, I sort of look at safeguarding and think, okay, they can come back and do some work with me if they've got one of those conditions that's appropriate, and the medical person says yes, or if they've been seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist, they said yes, okay, I can put my cards on the table and say this is what I've learned to do over the years. Your thoughts. And I had a client one time, a young girl had severe anxiety. She wouldn't leave the house. For years she didn't leave the house. She was only about 18 at the time. And before I started working with her, she was getting clinical help. I said, well, I want to communicate with your clinician first of all, and to see if it's appropriate. We did, we spoke over the phone. I spoke to the clinician. I said, okay, the young girl wants to work with me. She wants to, we've talked about regressing her and doing other interventions that may be useful. But before we proceed, I want to put it past you. What are your thoughts? What we're going to be working with is the anxiety. Nothing else, because she had other conditions too, anxiety. And the clinician said, well, it's her call. So for me, that's as good as saying, okay, and I told the young girl, I said, the clinician says it's your call what you do. This is what I'm going to do. And these are the implications. What could happen? For and against. The exact process, a reappraisal process. But equally in saying that, it's quite an intricate process. And she goes, well, at the moment, I haven't left the house for a long time, and I'm willing to give it a go. And I've been to specialists, and they're none the wiser, and she's finding it tough. So I gave it a go, and I worked with her, okay? And she improved. She improved to the point that, cutting a long story short, she got her life back, by the way, and she's doing very well now. Not putting it down to me. But the irony was, by the way, it reminds me too, the irony was that one of the consultants she was seeing for another condition she had was baffled. And his secretary actually wrote me a letter saying, we'd like to know more about what you do. He was a top consultant in the country, specialising in what he did. He's like, what did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. I just facilitate. I don't convince, I convey. Facilitate. And I said, I'm more than happy to do a seminar for you guys for free. I don't want nothing off it, I'll do it for free. But what I want you to do is I want to keep this under wraps in the sense that I don't want people thinking everyone's going to improve the way she improved, because these are things that are multifactorial, as you all know. But the point being is that the way I see it, you gauge things on intrusivity, the level of intrusivity. For me, hypnosis, if you say to the person, you can come back any time in complete control, or hypnosis, self-hypnosis, it's not very intrusive. You can shut it down if it's not working for you. And that's the way to be very permissive, if that sort of makes sense. Well, okay, what have I got? So the young girl, what has she got to lose? I do an intervention with her. It's not for her. Put your hand up, we stop. And you go back to where you were before, with who you were before. Nothing's lost. And that's the way she saw it. Okay? But the point being is that on the other side of the scale, the person who sort of emails me for this sort of trauma that she's in, I don't feel I can take her on based on what she's told me if the clinician doesn't think it might be appropriate. And the reason for that is because obviously there's implications in bringing someone back, abreactions and so on and so forth. So, she decides that that's not what she wants to do, fine by me. So to give you a bit of an insight, important to collaborate together. And we've just seen earlier this morning, and we've got the clip as well, and you can go over it again, how powerful energy is. How much just by holding onto something that someone has. can come through. And I didn't do that to prove anything. All I did that was to sort of show you, and you make your own mind up. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything today or any of the courses I do. I'm conveying, you make your own mind up. I'm just going to give you some anecdotal experiences, some scientific research I've done over the years, and some learnings over many, many years and experiences. But I'm going to do a couple of interactive techniques with you and do a bit of regression now before we go into the deep component. But I want you to think about your earliest memory. And perhaps you can close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. But think of your earliest memory. Okay? Just breathing in naturally and normally. Make it a pleasant memory. And as you reflect back on one of your earliest memories, a nice childhood memory, notice what you see, what you hear, what you feel, where you are, any sounds, any colours, any feelings, where the feelings are. And breathing naturally, normally. And just go with the memory. I'm going to pause for a moment and let you experience this memory. Okay? And in your own time, in your own pace, just gradually come back to the here and now. Okay, so we're regressing all the time. We're regressing all the time throughout every day. It's a natural process. So if you, for example, go visit your parents at some point, if you had visited your parents and they call you in a certain way, you regress to being like a 5-year-old. So maybe your mum shouts your name out and you regress to being a 5. Or you get pulled over on the highway by the police and you regress to being, So we're regressing all the time. And some examples that I'm going to use of people I've worked with regression, for example, who haven't always gone in the past lives, but some people have. And all that matters is that the goal is to get more adaptive. So there's a girl I was working with one time, she was a top trampoline, one of the best trampolines in the country. And she had a situation in her life where one of her colleagues had burst his leg on the trampoline. And that sort of scarred her emotionally, and she gave up trampolining. So I'd regressed her. And interestingly enough, she didn't go back to that point, because I regressed her based on the emotion, to reappraise the emotion, not so much the event. She went back a lot early on, much earlier on. She first identified this emotion. It was really fascinating, and you can read it, it's on the newspaper. And she went on to start trampolining again, and I think she won a silver at the national championships and sent me a text. But long story short, that shows you how useful it can be. When I was doing some BBC radio in Manchester, this woman who wanted to reduce in weight, one of the issues she had was to start swimming again. And she felt she could swim again. She hadn't swam for many, many years. She'd then be able to get her social life back. And she had an incident in the pool. As an 8-year-old, I think someone threw her in. She didn't swim for like 56 years. And I regressed, and she actually went back to that event. That shows sometimes you do go back to the event. And she did go swimming not long after that. But the point being, sometimes we will go back to a certain event. But sometimes it's so implicit that I didn't even realise. So a woman I was working one time for weight reduction again, she had an issue with binge eating after a certain time in the evening. And every time she get home from work, stressful day, and she sort of eat chocolate and cake, I regressed her. She goes back to being a 4-year-old. Whenever she sort of grazed her knee, her mum would give her cake. So she sort of loved and because she'd broken up in a relationship and she felt lonely, she'd go home and she'd eat chocolate to compensate for that. So sometimes we're not even aware of it. A woman I worked with one time was on a course. She didn't buy into any of this. It was on a course, and she had an issue with phlegm. She couldn't even say the word phlegm. And I regressed her back to a point that she couldn't even remember, but she was like 2-year-old. I think it was her uncle or her granddad had emphysema, and he'd cough away, and we went back and reappraised it, and she came back, and in the evening she sent me an email saying, I've just wiped my nephew's nose for the first time. So it is powerful stuff, reappraisal. I'm going to talk about how we do that. I'm going to talk about how we code time, and other ways we can do that from a time point of view. The way in which we internally represent time has a far-reaching effect on us, because it touches every aspect of our life. We organise activities daily through the use of time. We all organise time in our own way. Okay? Some people linear, some people not linear. It all depends, okay, on the person. But what we'll do now as a process, an NLP process timeline, very briefly. What I'd like to do is perhaps just close your eyes again. And as you close your eyes, what I'd like you to do is just think of the event that happened. And as you think of a memory, an event that happened, for example, like, cleaning your teeth or making breakfast, just a general process. And what I want you to do now is think of something that happened, say, a few weeks ago, or perhaps Christmas time, or a holiday you went on a couple of years ago. And as you do that, perhaps it's organised in a linear way, in a structured way. And perhaps you can think of tomorrow what you've got on, or what you're going to have for lunch, or any holidays you're going to go on this year, or maybe where you're going next year. Okay, just see how you structure time. Okay, not everyone naturally perceives time as a line. However, everyone can perceive time as a line, and it's useful to presuppose that is a line for maybe a therapeutic or goal technique. So, in your own time and your own pace, if you come back to the here and now. Okay, who perceived time as a line? No, some people did. Okay, where was the past for you?
When you was asking about holidays and what we were doing the other week, I'd straight away it was another course I was on about a month ago, and then Christmas time when I'm on holiday as well. So
okay. So where was the past? Whereabouts would you point? If you had to point to the past, where would that be?
I was just picking up on what you were saying.
Okay. So you immediately see, look at the analog. You sort of exactly. So that's giving him.
When you said brush your teeth, I went right back to when I was a kid, when I used to try and brush my teeth with the old toothbrush. I used to putting your nails on a blackboard used to really go through me brushing your teeth. Okay.
Okay, you went right back. Yeah. Okay. And generally, where was the did anyone, when we talked about the here and now, where was the here and now for people? Anyone? Okay, really interesting. Okay. So what we have in timeline, you got in time. So generally, the person who's in time is in the moment. When you say the here and now, they're here. If they're through time, sometimes like the here and now is in front of them. That's called through time. So they're looking at the timeline as if it's in front of them. And the general consensus is the person who punctual, good at planning, is generally sees through time. When we look at things in terms of in time, it's the sort of person that sort of loses track of time, and that's context dependent too, by the way. Generally, through time people are punctual, good at planning and time management. They might find it hard to get into the moment, maybe at least orientated. But it's context dependent. I think it's important to know that. So you might be through time for work and in time for leisure and so on and so forth. But we're going to touch on that more as we go along in the afternoon. But where age regression is concerned, we sort of touched on that too. So we use a number of methods to encourage the mind to draw back the veil of separation between our subconscious. So we can remember earlier parts of our existence and our conscious mind. Hypnosis is the main instrument, by the way. Meditation, dream analysis and journaling is used too. So children up to the age of 6 predominantly use theta brainwaves that we use in hypnosis. The veil is readily open. At around 6, it generally starts to close, and the main function becomes the usual beta waves, which help us with everyday activity. Hypnosis taps into the brain the brain waves that are simply opening up that door again, possibly. The door into the unconscious. So the aim of the therapy is to identify maladaptive responses and replace them with more adaptive ones, as a general rule. So I'm doing this and I want to do that. So you've got clear outcomes. In the solution orientation approach, we're not interested so much in using age regression as a way of finding out the truth and so on and so forth. Did he do that? Did she do that? It's more to reappraise the situation. So it influence the outcome. I did the best I could then, but now I would do something different. So, okay, you emotionally code the event, but then you're living out that framework. So at 8 years of age, Margaret had an experience at the swimming pool. At 64, she's still afraid to swim, or afraid to go near the water, because the emotional memory, okay? But if we can reappraise it, then it might be different, okay? Which we'll touch as we go along. What's really important that you do is ask open questions, by the way. We're going to go into a new demonstration after the break. Okay. Anyone know when we ask open questions?
So you're not leading someone?
Precisely. I mean, and the sort of open questions you ask are who, what, when, how, which.
With who?
Exactly. It's quite useful to do that. So we're not sort of leading them. What can you see around you? What did you feel? What date is it? So that's sort of an important thing to sort of take note. Try and avoid closed questions if you can, okay? Unless you want a yes or no response. So, for example, okay, is it your birthday? Are you the Queen of England? Are you Cleopatra?
Are you a boy?
Yeah, precise. So if we can avoid them questions, it's quite useful to do that. But obviously, if you do ask those questions and do filter in there, then fair enough. But you can avoid those questions. And the point being is, if someone experiences anxiety, for example, you can go back to before the event. So you might have had an experience in a car, going shopping, but the experience wasn't always there. Okay, so for example, the part of the brain aversion, the amygdala, so you record experiences, the brain designed to keep you alive. So if you're walking down the street and someone chases you with a knife, for example, even 30 years ago, if you sort of see someone who looks similar, you walk down the same street, it can invoke the same feeling. Even though they're not there anymore, you can still hypothesize. So one could have had a traumatic event in a train, in a bus, in a plane, and even many, many years afterwards, still feel anxious, reflecting on that. But you can go back before the experience to identify a place they were when they were calm, if that sort of makes any sense.
Yeah, that's when people are fear-based and just based on fear, they see something in the newspaper or something like that, it gives them that reaction. They're just running on survival mode all the time.
It is, yeah, and fear is a social function. We communicate danger to others so they can take appropriate action.
Yeah.
So a bit like, say, have you ever gone to a restaurant and someone's eating food and their facial expression tells you this food's not good? They don't need to tell you, they just put the food in their mouth and it's one of them really, so,
I've literally walked into a restaurant and gone, I'm not eating.
Yeah, because you've seen the hygiene ratings.
No, not even faces on everyone.
Yeah.
It's a smell, it's a vibration and everything. Just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, no, precisely. So we communicate danger. So if we go back to our primal instinct, years gone by, obviously, what you ate was dangerous. You wouldn't have what we've got now. It can be dangerous now, but you go back thousands of years ago, you eat the wrong berries, you're gone, you're toast, man, So the point being is that you see the reaction, the person eats the food, and if they have that sort of reaction, then okay, you communicate danger. So age regression is quite useful because you can influence the outcome based on where you are now. And there are things we're going to look at as well as the past life effect bridge, where you identify the emotion, the initial sensitivity event, like I talked about the trampoline, the feeling, so you can build a bridge. The effect bridge is being constructed. The next goal is to uncover the initial sensitizing event, which started the problem of the issue. We're going to look at regression in terms of just being able to go back to the experience. And if we can sort of extend the comfort zone and push the person gradually to get there, not push them into the experience. Rescripting. So rescripting is quite useful. So we read the traumatic memory and alter it. So memory rescripting techniques are often taught to people with post-traumatic stress to help them deal with emotional responses to traumatic memory. But you can also do it in everyday life. Certain situations that evoke emotional response. Every time he does this or she does this, I do that. When I see this, that happens there. So you can't go back and change it, you can rescript it. And the idea is to modify and make it more benign. So what I mean by that is that what else could it be? So it's not the event, it's your interpretation of the event that has a cascade on your behaviour, emotion and physiology, so to speak. So memories fade in the brain. Memories gradually fade in the brain from states gone by. And the reason being is that they're not as rich as we first experienced because we only got finite neurons in the brain. Because our neurons get used for new memories. Okay? So what we can do is, in age regression, is if the person's reliving the experience, because implicitly have a reaction, we can disconnect or dissociate from the present experience to connect to the past experience, and we can connect to another experience that dissolves the feeling that experience gives us in that situation. We can cognitively reappraise the situation. So very briefly, a reappraisal would be, and a reappraisal will be, you walk out for lunch, and let's say last week you have a minor fallout with your friend, and you see your friend in the shopping, and they ignore you, or at least you think they ignored you. You walk past them and you sort of wave at them, and you think, well, did they ignore me? And then you sort of base your interpretation, your appraisal, your perception on, they've ignored me. They're not my friend, they've fallen out. I can't believe they've fallen out with me. And then you sort of start to feel anxious, upset. You send them a narky text, or you don't bother sending them a text at all. You don't speak to them for a long time. And then you feel physically upset, and heart rate goes up. And so point I'm saying there is you come back at lunchtime and say, okay, what else could this mean? And well, it could mean I didn't see you.
Forgot his glasses.
Precisely. And then you feel different about the situation. They might have seen you, can't control that. They might have, they might be blanking you, but the point being they might not have. Then you feel different emotionally. Then behaviourally, you might send them a text saying, are you okay?
You can emotionally detach yourself from that anyway, can't you? Just say, well, I can't...
That's the other appraisal, That's one appraisal, exactly. And physically it's all different. The behaviour is different to what it was before. So the point being is that a reappraisal involves transforming the meaning of a negative situation that one encounters to reduce the emotional impact. And that could be, at least in the methodology we're using today, regressing in this life, but some people do go beyond this life. When you regress some people, they go as far as into the womb, but past lives too. Now the argument is that past lives really exist. We've talked about it this morning. We can't prove one way or the other otherwise, but in this setting, it's not to prove. We're not regression tourists, unless someone wants to be a regression tourist and see if they were Cleopatra or the king or whatever. The point being, we're looking at what the problem they have. And by utilising that, it can be a very powerful process to help the person become aware and unstuck from the issue by doing some of these techniques and strategies. Going forward. I'm mindful of time on lunch now, by the way, because you guys are probably looking forward to lunch. Can I just, how much we got?
20 to 1.
Okay, yeah. So we've gone slightly beyond, but if we're back for lunch at 1:30, is that okay? We can sort of address any questions or sort of go a little bit overboard. So after lunch, we'll do a demonstration and we'll go into more content and go from there. So 1:30, everyone's back.
Yeah.